We are kicking off the first video of 2022 with some trade rumors around the Oilers, the Flames, the Bruins, and the Seattle Kraken. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today is January the 1st. Happy New Year to everybody. First video here for 2022. I hope everybody had a safe and happy New Year's Eve, and we're hopefully going to see a much better 2022. I know the past couple of New Years, it's been a little bit depressing if you think back, thinking that the next year is going to be better than the last, when we're still in a bit of a pandemic mess here. Things are, still, a lot going on in the world that's the same as the past 18 to 24 months. And let's hope that 2022 brings an end to that. We can all move on. I know I contemplated doing a 2021 recap type of video, looking at some of the top stories. And to be honest, a lot of it was so much related around COVID that it was just kind of depressing. And it's like, I just don't want to do that to myself or any of you to really kind of rehash all of that stuff. So let's get started today with the latest rumors from around the NHL. At least we have NHL hockey. Tonight we're going to see a very different two sets of worlds here between Canada and the United States. We're going to see a game, which is actually, games are just getting underway here as I record this video, between the Maple Leafs and the Senators in Toronto with 0 fans. And then you're going to go to a packed stadium full of, I'm not sure exactly what the capacity is there in Minnesota for the Winter Classic, but thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of fans there. So completely different worlds right now in the restrictions and the rules and everything around dealing with this pandemic. So it's I know from a fan's perspective, and I'm sure from the player's perspective, it's a little frustrating to see quite the drastic differences. Now, on to the rumors of the day. We're going to start with the Oilers. I mean, we've seen Mike Smith make a return in goal for the Oilers over the past week here, played in a couple of games, but he's now hurt again. He was out for such an extended period of time. They relied heavily on Mikko Koskinen, who had a good start, but then, like typical Koskinen fashion, eventually kind of fizzled out. And it was time for something to change here. Thankfully, Stuart Skinner's given him some good games, and Mike Smith's come back. He's been rusty, which is probably fair given how long of a layoff he had, but now he's out again injured. So you have to wonder what Ken Holland's thinking here about the goaltending situation. Can Mike Smith get the job done? Can he get the consistency going, and can he stay healthy? Because you cannot rely on Koskinen and Skinner alone. I don't see that really being an option at all going into the playoffs. We've seen pretty much a Jekyll and Hyde type of team at times here with the Oilers this year. A lot of people don't really know what we have with this team. Like, are they a real solid contender like they look like early going, or are they not? I mean, they're two different teams at times. So you have to think, like we talked about yesterday, with the possibility of some goalies being on the market here, like Korpisalo, like Fleury, maybe a few others, that this might accelerate a Ken Holland pulling the trigger here to get a goaltender in Edmonton. Now, at this point, we're not led to believe that this Mike Smith injury is going to be a long-term thing. Right now, they're only listing him as day-to-day, but sometimes these injuries start that way, turn out to be more serious, or linger on, and end up being longer. Obviously, the older you are, too, you usually do take longer to bounce back and rehab from different ailments. So certainly not a good sign. Between the pipes with Edmonton, I know they had an overtime loss today to the New York Islanders. And they're going to probably be playing a lot of road games here, like many of the Canadian teams here in the month of January, with so many NHL games being postponed and rescheduled when they can have fans in the building. It's quite a scenario that teams really need to be cautious here, because their seasons are on the line. Like, this next batch of games, like, we're already past the 30-game mark for a lot of these teams. If they end up playing 10, 12, 13 games on the road this month, and then, if they don't have a good month, it could really, kind of sink or swim here with their season. They're either going to, sink in the standings or end up coming up higher into the top. But in the case of the Oilers, it's really kind of difficult to say where they go. But personally, I think this injury might be something that accelerates a trade finally. They need to do something, and they can't go into the playoffs yet again with the same goaltending situation. Now, speaking of goaltenders, we're going to switch now over to the Boston Bruins. Now, of course, we know that, winger Jake DeBrusk has requested a trade. That's been publicly known now for a number of weeks. We've yet to see a deal. Obviously, Don Sweeney and the Bruins have yet to find a deal that they're happy with here to pull the trigger. But you have to think, being one of the top players that are most likely to be traded here early in 2022, when you combine the fact that they now have the taxi squads available for the next month until the All-Star break until February, that gives them the ability to have a few more players on hand, which is good. And it also, the fact that the Bruins appear to be really close to signing goaltender Tuukka Rask, those two things combined are going to create a need from a cap perspective as well as a roster perspective that they very well should be able to accelerate a move here to find Jake DeBrusk a trade. We've talked about him being linked to a variety of teams out there. We've talked about some possibilities of being traded to the Oilers, maybe to the Islanders. We've talked about even the Flames having interest. There's others that were reportedly interested as well, but obviously nobody's really gotten serious with the Bruins when it comes to trade talks, though. At this point, the Bruins have made it pretty well known, according to NHL insiders, that they want another younger player in similar type value in return. It doesn't have to be a forward. It could be a defenseman, but somebody similar age, similar status, that can be similar value. And they still consider DeBrusk's value to be high, 2 years removed from a 27-goal season. Of course, the last couple of years he's been much more inconsistent, had a hard time finding his game. But a lot of that, too, is based on how he's been played in the lineup and the line mates and everything like that. So, it's fair to say he's fallen out of favor with head coach Bruce Cassidy and hasn't really gotten a lot of the good starts and line assignments to really, accelerate his, offensive totals and either. But still, he's a player that needs a fresh start. That's apparent here. And I would think between like I said, between the Rask signing coming shortly and the fact that they have extra players on standby in the taxi squad, that should allow us to see a deal and have this player moved on here early on in the next little while. Now, the other team we want to really talk about today is the Calgary Flames. We've seen a lot of the Canadian teams have a variety of reporters that work with them for TSN and Sportsdom, the beat reporters, making a lot of predictions for 2022. And obviously, the TSN had a Flames prediction article that I went through here and found interesting. I want to give you some thoughts on what they're saying, see what we think about all of their thoughts for 2022. Now, first up, they think the Flames are going to be looking to add either another solid defenseman or possibly a scoring forward. They'd probably like to do both, but it's going to be challenging to do given their cap situation. So obviously, one of the names targeted, though, for a D acquisition would be the return of Captain Mark Giordano, who, of course, went to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft, is heavily rumored to be traded ahead of the deadline. But the Calgary Flames, as much as they might be interested in bringing back a player they're extremely familiar with, and he probably wouldn't be opposed to it either, especially given how much success the Flames have had early on this season, I would think that it's going to be a challenge to get it done, mainly because there's been rumored to be a lot of teams interested in his services, which might cause them to have to make an overpayment to get it done. Now, when it comes to the scoring forwards, one name that was mentioned as well was Habs forward Tyler Toffoli, who I mentioned yesterday in a video for Montreal, who's somebody they don't really have to trade, but if they want to look at some players in Montreal that do have decent value, good contract, good playoff record, enough experience that would be attractive to a team wanting to make a playoff push, Toffoli certainly falls into that category. Now, like I said, Montreal might feel he's worthwhile keeping around as well, and they might choose not to move him, but I think there'll be enough interest that they at least seriously have to consider it. So those are the couple of names out there being linked to Calgary right now, but we'll see where that goes. Now, a few other predictions I found very interesting here is a couple of the players that would have to be moved out would be a combination of defenseman Nikita Zadorov as well as Juuso Valimaki, who's really gotten limited opportunity this year and ended up in the minors. Valimaki's pretty much been overshadowed by Oliver Shillington, and his emergence this year has kind of pushed him down to the point that he's not getting a regular spot, and like I said, he's stuck down at the American Hockey League right now. In the case of Zadorov, another player who they probably don't want to keep long-term, hasn't really had a great season. He's a big, strong, physical defenseman, but does have a lot of parts of his game that are not the most attractive, and certainly, gets himself falling out of favor with coaches at times as well. So those are two defensemen rumored to be possibly players they would consider moving to make these deals happen. And in the forward group, it was a little bit surprising, but Dylan Dubé's name was mentioned. A 23-year-old forward has a bit of a term on his contract, so it's 2 more years after the current season. Not a high cap hit, just over $2 million, but somebody who has struggled a bit offensively defined his game here. Obviously, he did have a bit of a breakout here when he got that contract, but has struggled to find consistency since then. And the Flames could consider moving him if they're able to find a good upgrade. I mean, the Flames are going to have their fair share of salary cap issues in players that they need to decide on, make decisions on in the offseason. One of the predictions in this TSN article is that Johnny Gaudreau does not re-sign ahead of the deadline, and that he moves into the offseason and leaves as an unrestricted free agent. Another one that they mentioned here is Sean Monahan either being traded or bought out, which is more likely to happen in the offseason, given the fact that if they did trade him, they'd probably have to retain salary in the last little bit of his contract, but thankfully there's not a lot of time there, so clearly a buyout wouldn't be overly expensive, but they have to sign Matthew Tkachuk, which is going to cost a pretty penny, and Andrew Mangiapane as well, which is also the way he's playing, going to be an expensive contract as well. He's earned himself a longer-term deal at a much higher cap hit than he's currently earning. In the case of Matthew Tkachuk, they predict a $9.5 million salary for Matthew with only a 3-year term. That would walk Tkachuk directly to free agency, which I know would probably make Flames fans extremely nervous. Now, I know if I were a Flames fan, I wouldn't be overly fond of that. Walking a player right to free agency like that is at the earliest possible age is something that's concerning, and it certainly makes you wonder about the long-term future of the player with the franchise. So, signing Tkachuk and Mangiapane is going to cost enough that they'd have to move out some of the other names we already mentioned as potential deadline moves, along with Monahan. And Gaudreau might be tough to sign compared to what he wants for a new deal anyhow. Certainly will be interested to see what kind of approach we see from GM Brad Treliving, who certainly in the past has made some big trades, but a lot of that's been done in the offseason, not so much leading into the NHL trade deadline. And regardless of what we do see, like I said, he's going to have a lot of big decisions in the offseason, and between the deadline and the offseason, the Flames are going to be one of the more interesting teams to watch. I know some people have been convinced for a long time that Johnny Gaudreau would leave as a UFA as soon as he was able to. Some are convinced he will re-sign. I know he said all the right things, played hard, put up good offensive point totals, so it's really difficult to say what the future holds. The Gaudreau and the team have made a note this year that they're not talking about the contract at all publicly, so we really don't know where things stand in that regard. There's been no leaks, no rumors, no nothing around negotiations, if they're taking place or not, or where things stand at any way. But considering Monahan's continued to struggle again this year, hasn't been the same since he had that hip surgery, I think the end of the road for him in Calgary is certainly coming soon. Either they trade him to a team like Arizona with an incentive, for example. That's a possibility. Maybe the Coyotes take on that contract with something extra added to it. Or if not, they consider a buyout this coming summer. And then I said they have to do the Tkachuk and Mangiapane deals. And right now, there's no indication that they won't get those deals done. Just a matter of how long they keep them locked up in Flames uniforms with those new deals. So it'll be interesting times ahead. Will we see the Oilers make a goalie trade here in the short term? Will the Calgary Flames look to make a big addition, possibly bringing back Captain Mark Giordano? And will we finally see a Jake DeBrusk trade out of Boston here early in 2022? Again, I hope you all had a safe and happy New Year. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.